Hello guys, this is Rocio Flores and this is the Can I Just Be podcast. Today's podcast is sort of about a few different ideas, I guess. I've been kind of working through some concepts in my head and I keep waiting for to have a perfect setup to describe what I want to talk about or to have a specific topic, and I'm like, that's the whole point of this podcast, to just kind of talk and to do the working through and the thinking of it all publicly rather than setting up some perfectly detailed post about a specific topic. And so I guess I can share a little bit of the kind of topics that I'm thinking of are authority and this concept of helplessness and it's kind of hard to think of the exact topic I want to speak about. So why don't I just go ahead and I just say what I want to talk about and the reason that I want to talk about it, and then I want to kind of give a little caveat. So first and foremost, the reason I want to talk about authority was because the last podcast I did was about the story of my life, and I talked a lot about my experiences growing up and sort of the abuse and trauma and the kind of situations that I experienced. And I wanted to talk about other experiences or other things that we've kind of gone through in our lives, or for example, just talking about some of the things that in general my husband and I had to experience, or how we make decisions about finances, or about our relationship, or how we came to faith, or those kind of things, right? And then I realized that in all of those conversations, I feel like before I'm able to really get into the nitty gritty of why we make certain decisions, there's a lot of back explanation. And a huge part of what guides me is always kind of thinking in the back of my mind, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm doing the wrong thing? What if I get in trouble? That's been the underlying feeling my entire life. Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to do the wrong thing? And that stems from living in an authoritarian household, and that being the guiding principle of the entirety of my upbringing. And so it's really hard to talk about, how I was influenced or how I've made certain decisions without taking into consideration the fact that authority has been a big issue for the vast majority of my life. And I notice it today. I notice it right now. I notice it as I'm I want to talk about a certain thing, or I want to talk about something that I've experienced, or I want to share something, and right on the back of my head, I'm just oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble. Somebody's going to get upset, or I'm going to do the wrong thing, or and it's shifted throughout the years from obviously my dad to other authority figures in my life to the ultimate authority in my life. And so I want to talk about some of the thoughts that I've had about this before I talk about anything else moving forward, because I think that I need to be able to look backwards and say, I need this to be taken into consideration before understanding why I think the way I think, why I do the things that I do, and why I move forward the way that I move forward. Also, I want to take into consideration that today is June 1st, 2020. And the last week we've had Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 4 days of protests and riots throughout the entire United States because of issues relating to race, police brutality, the Black Lives Matter movement, and it kind of so sometimes it's crazy because I'll be thinking about a certain subject that I want to talk about or something, and then everything around my world starts to become about those subjects. And it's either because, God's hey, you wanted to learn about this, or because I'm reading into it, right? Whatever we're going through, experiencing in our world, whatever we're experiencing inside is kind of forming how we process that. So I do want to point out that I want to talk about a few things, and I don't want to not take into consideration the fact that we have an entire country right now that's having an issue with authority, and that is part of the conversation. It's part of my own experience. It's part of how I move forward and what I talk about in my own life, in both in personal conversations and in public forums like this one. I had an experience recently where we were talking, and basically I felt that feeling of, shut up, you're wrong, don't say anything, don't fight back, just be quiet. But it didn't feel right, in the sense that I was talking about something that I felt very strongly about, something that I knew about, something that I was very clear about. And I was still having that feeling of like, retreat. Like, you're not safe, retreat. And I hated it. I hated that feeling so much because it sent me into a whirlwind in my mind of having to basically go over again, like, am I wrong? Am I correct? Should I be saying that? Should I not be saying something? And to be honest, throughout my whole life, I've always kind of veered on the end of just don't say anything, stay quiet, listen. And in my relationships, I don't really get a chance to speak up on the things that I care about because more often than not, I'm usually more scared of the relationship going wrong than the fact that what we're saying or what's being asserted is wrong. And then over the last few years, I think I've done a much better job at changing that. And it's something that I've wanted to change for a really long time because, I guess it's hard to talk about this because if you don't understand what I'm referring to, it doesn't make sense. So let me explain that, why the word helplessness is in the title here too, okay? Look, when you've spent your entire life being told that you are wrong, being told to shut up, not having a voice, not having any way out, or even being allowed to think about that, you genuinely just feel helpless. Now, growing up, I didn't know these words. Obviously, I didn't know what authority meant. I didn't know what helplessness meant. I didn't have access to other ways of thinking. I was just experiencing my days in and out, right? And very little of what I knew was from people who kind of entered in and noticed things and said things, right? Obviously, growing up, my mom finally left my dad. And so she got out. And we weren't ignorant to the fact that things weren't okay. Like, we knew that things were wrong, that there was something wrong, that the situation that we were in was wrong. So I never felt like I was helpless. Like, I never felt like I wasn't ever going to be able to take action to get out. I just couldn't in the moment. And so felt very strong when I was a 5-year-old, right? And very strong when I was a 7-year-old. And when we finally left home and we left my dad, and then I ended up back in that house. And so it wears you down, I guess is the word I'm trying to get at. When I was a kid and when it was very overt to see authority being exercised in a negative way. So seeing somebody hit somebody else is very clearly wrong, right? Like, most of us can agree, hey man, don't hit a person. Like, most of us can agree that if you get hit, that hurts. We don't like that. But subtle abuse, subtle trauma is a lot harder to process because you don't always 100% know whether or not it's wrong to be told to shut up, to be told names, to be told to act in certain ways or to assert yourself in certain ways, and that you can't assert yourself in certain ways. Like, a lot of the subtleties of verbal, emotional, mental abuse, like, the half of the freaking problem is that you don't even know if it's happening. Like, you just know that you feel like shit, but you don't know that, like, you can do anything about it, or is it wrong? Am I wrong? I was just told I was wrong, so that must be wrong. So after a while, that compounds on itself. And when something happens and nobody helps you, you realize, okay, well, maybe people won't help me. It's up to me. And then maybe you do something about it and you realize, well, that didn't help, so maybe I can't do anything about it. And then you're like, well, maybe time will pass and things will get better. And then that doesn't work. So then you're like, okay, well, then time's not going to help. And the next thing you know, you kind of live an existence of recognizing and genuinely believing that things will just not get better. Like, that's just not an option. So the reason that this came up was because one of the conversations that I was having made me think of this concept of learned helplessness, which is a concept, it's more of like a theory, right? Like, it's one of those theories that's gone around in psychology and stuff, where there's a belief that, like, when presented with so many issues, a person can basically learn that it's not possible for their situation to change. And so they become helpless, not because there really isn't any possibilities for them to receive help or get help. It's because they just they've been presented with so many opportunities where that wasn't really a thing. And so then you become sort of, how do I say it? Like, you become conditioned to accept the situation that you're in, and that's genuinely what you believe is reality. And so that relates back to authority in the sense that if you have negative authority, where like you have an authoritarian, I feel like I have to explain a lot of things. There's like different types of authority, right? Like authoritarian versus authoritative. So there's positive authority. There's authority where there's just, obviously there's ranks in authority in our lives. There's levels of one person knows more than another person. One person has more responsibility than another person. And in those kinds of situations, it could be positive, right? Like a father and a child. A father knows better than their child. It is their responsibility to take care of their child. It is their responsibility to raise that child. And there is an authority over the child. But there can be negative authority where rather than taking on a responsibility to care for the child, they take that authority as meaning that they have all power over that child and that child doesn't have their own persona. And so then they take over everything, right? So obviously it doesn't present itself only in parent-child relationships. It's in romantic relationships, in relationships where a person is, like a student and a teacher, a boss and an employee, government and citizens, etc. In the past, I can assure you, any single time that I've had situations where like I should have stood up for something, I should have said something, like I knew I was right, I was very clear with what I was right, and I knew what I believed regardless of whether I knew it was right or not, and in my head, I couldn't do it. Like I couldn't speak up, I couldn't stand up, I couldn't say something because I had it so deeply ingrained in me, like you're gonna get in trouble, like this is gonna be a bad thing, this is gonna turn out bad for you, like you can't do that. And I remember looking back and feeling bad about it, and that's just, it's me and my feelings. Like I felt bad about it. I remember being in very specific situations where I didn't do what I should have done, like not standing up with someone, not standing up for someone, not standing up for myself, letting bad things happen to me and letting bad things happen to other people. And, part of me can look back and think, okay, well, I was in an unprecedented situation. I was in a situation that I didn't have control over. I had very real reasons to believe that I couldn't take on that responsibility back then. But looking at my life now, that's not the case anymore. I was just thinking this week, I don't really have that many people who I would genuinely consider to have authority over me. Not in any sense that isn't me giving them authority, right? I work from home, so I don't have a boss that tells me what to do. I don't live with my parents, so I don't have my parents telling me what to do. Other than the basic follow the law of the land, and I'm married, so I have to take into consideration my husband, and I'm a Christian, which means that the ultimate authority in my life has to be God. Other than that, any authority in my life is an authority that I give to somebody. Like, it is my decision whether or not I view somebody as a person of authority in my life. So I was thinking this. So during this conversation I had with somebody where it's kind of like saying they pulled rank. You know that saying? Where in that moment, the way they tried to state that they were correct was not by arguing that what they were saying was correct. It was by basically trying to say that they knew better or that they were better because of their authority. And that really messed with my mind. I was like, no, I can't let this happen. Some of the responses that we get in our body because of trauma. So the whole point of trauma if you don't understand what trauma is, right? Like something happened in your life that was traumatic, obviously. Post-traumatic stress disorder means that post the traumatic event, you now have a disorder. Disorder can come in many ways. Basically, different physical, mental, emotional symptoms that occur as a response to that trauma, right? And obviously PTSD specifically is a specific disorder that you have to be diagnosed with. Anybody can experience trauma. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have PTSD. People can experience PTSD symptoms, and that doesn't mean that they are diagnosed with a disorder. It doesn't mean that that disorder will affect them throughout their entirety of their life. But anytime something happens in your life, you react to it, right? And so when you've experienced something that was very, very difficult to experience, your body is going to react in ways that it needs to react in order to keep you safe and secure. The ways that your body tries to go about basically managing or coping with the situation can sometimes linger. For example, don't come up to me and tap me on the shoulder if I can't see you. I will jump. Sometimes I scream. And people in my life are always so freaking surprised by that because it's just odd, right? I guess I don't understand why it's odd. It happens every single time. And I'm like, it happens every single time. Stop doing it. It's not something I choose to do. And it's just one of those things that kind of lingered, right? Like for so long, I was so scared. And I was always just scared all the time. I was scared of the, what if this happens? What if that happens? And so I'm jumpy. That's something that happens, right? So it's also not something that I put too much emphasis on dealing with because it doesn't matter so much compared to other issues that have mattered much more in my life or that have affected me way worse because of trauma. Being jumpy is just like a little symptom, right? But it's a very physical symptom. And so every time it does happen and somebody reacts to it negatively, I remind myself, I remember like, wow, it's crazy how much like I'm not able to control my body in that moment. It just kind of happens. And so that kind of happens with people in general. When you have a conversation with somebody and it brings up something negative, next thing you know, you're there again. You're having those emotions again. You're having those feelings, and you unfortunately either stay in those feelings or you move from those feelings or you are able to move past them. You know, some people are, I don't like to use the word resilient because that seems almost like you're saying that some people are better because they are more resilient or are able to get past their issues better, as if that somehow means that people who can't are worse, which isn't the case because it really just depends on so many factors. But what I'm trying to get at is I've noticed many times in the past where somebody challenges me or somebody tries to use authority in a negative way, and my go-to has always just been like, retreat, go back, say you're sorry, just take it. And then I spend a year later still going over it in my head and be like, I don't think I was wrong. Like, damn it, I should have said something. I shouldn't have apologized. I wasn't wrong. They shouldn't have said that to me. They shouldn't have used that as an authority. They shouldn't have claimed authority over me. They shouldn't have done that. And now you have feelings of like resentment or anger or just right? And for me, the way I've kind of categorized growth from those situations, from my former self over the last few years, has been to not allow that to happen anymore. Because the PTSD response was to feel fear, to have my stomach hurt, to feel nauseous, to sweat, to get almost into panic the moment somebody says something negative to me, when they used authority against me. That was my body's physical reaction. I couldn't help that. That's just what it does when that happens, right? And maybe that'll change eventually as I change that pattern, but that's what happens. But what I have control over is my response, and not allowing that fear to take over, and not allowing that feeling and those thoughts to flood in, telling me that I'm helpless and there's nothing I can do. So this most recent event, I didn't do that. I kept talking. I didn't allow myself to be talked over. And I wasn't okay with that authority being used against me. I could say that the repercussions of that were that I felt like shit for days. I literally felt sick for days. I was in bed one of those days where I couldn't like get out of bed, and it sucks. But it's what needs to happen if I want to change that pattern, so that the next time somebody speaks up to me, I don't have that same reaction. The next time somebody tries to use authority against me, I don't have that same reaction, because I've worked through those emotions. I've worked through that difficulty, that pain, that horrible nausea, and the ugly feeling. And I can expect it, so it doesn't come at me kind of like somebody tapping my shoulder all of a sudden, so that I don't jump out of nowhere. And I'm prepared to listen to what the person is saying and respond as if I actually have the authority to respond, because I do. Throughout this last week, I kind of went through my usual little cycle of like looking up articles and looking up like people who talk about these things and people who talk about, authority, and I looked up the concept of learned helplessness, because a big issue for me is that I've recognized that feeling both in myself and the people around me. A lot of the times when it's hard to get past and get through to somebody like, hey, you have a choice in this matter. You're able to talk about this. You're able to do something about this, when they feel like they don't. And so I had to kind of look into that. I was looking for some tools on how to combat that, or how to go about, understanding that, both in my own life, but also for me when I coach people, because that's something that comes up a lot often. And so I also then looked up Christianity and learned helplessness, because that's a big barrier in my life. Basically, a lot of the people who have taught me and who have like kind of helped me learn about Christianity and stuff like that, I've recognized a lot of the concepts that have been taught to me have created that sense of like, you don't really have control. Like, you don't have a choice. Like, this is how things are. And a lot of the times I'm left kind of feeling like, but that doesn't make sense. Like, but the Bible says this and the Bible says that. And I don't understand where like that lack of choice is kind of taken. Like, how does that come in to how did that happen? So I like sat there and read like an 80-page paper on Christianity and learned helplessness, where I basically I learned a lot of I was like, a lot of it makes sense, where it talked about it's not Christianity itself that creates a sense of helplessness. It's a lot of how it's taught. And I've recognized that in my own life and what I've been taught, and what some people have tried to, I guess, persuade me to, like, this is right, this is wrong. And recognizing that I have the power to choose not to listen to that or to act against that. That's not the same as saying that you would act against God, or that you would purposely go in rebellion of somebody who's teaching you just because, you want to be Mr. Badass, right? But it's about recognizing that, like, literally God gives me the power to make these decisions. Like, he didn't have to do that, and he does. So I'm able to make decisions for myself. I'm able to speak up for myself. I'm able to engage with his word and engage with my life using his word without necessarily having to constantly be giving into other people's authority. Does that make sense? This doesn't mean that you don't ever submit to authority. It doesn't mean that you don't seek people to have authority over you, especially when relating to things like your faith, right? Like, you need teachers and you need people who guide you and mentors, and that is important. But I think the part that I'm trying to get at is that you have to be skeptical about that authority. You have to recognize that the ultimate authority is God, not any human being, and that you have to question whether or not this is an authority that you want to submit to, that you should submit to. So then my church's last service was about submission. I'm like, oh my goodness. And it's hard to kind of go over, like, there's a really big difference between submission and helplessness. And if that's not taken into consideration, I think it could be very dangerous for people who have experienced being helpless, people who have been abused, people who have gone through traumatic experiences, people who are systematically, consistently, and constantly abused. The idea of submission is very dangerous. So that's how that ties back into like what's going on in the world right now, because we've kind of seen this pattern of arguing over, do we submit to our governing authorities? Do we do what they tell us to do? Should I wear a mask or not wear a mask? Should I go out or not go out? Should I protest or not protest? Do I go out and support people who are fighting for their freedom, or do I stay indoors and not do anything? Do I speak up for the people who can't speak up? Do I speak up for myself? Do I only speak up when it's about myself? Should I only speak up when it's about myself? Should I speak up when the people in authority in my life and the people that I've either given authority or who believe they have authority over me? Should I say something when they say the wrong thing, when they do the wrong thing, when they are clearly in the wrong? And how do I decide that? How do I recognize, is this person coming from a standpoint of not having information, not having the knowledge or the understanding or the experience in a certain subject, and so they're coming at a situation with their opinion versus what they genuinely studied? Or do they have malicious intent? Should I take that into consideration when I'm presenting my point of view? So there's some interesting concepts here. I've noticed lots of really there's a lot of memes, lots of posts right now. There's a lot of tweets, lots of stuff to share, and it's very hard not to want to engage with all of them, both on the positive and the negative, and things that you agree with, things that you disagree with. But one of the posts that I very much enjoyed, or at least have really liked that they brought up this idea, are posts that point out that we've been inconsistent in our struggles. We've been inconsistent in our conversations and inconsistent in what we speak out about. So, for example, saying hey, you were silent and didn't post or didn't say anything about this issue, but then you were not silent and did post or speak out about this issue. And I mean, obviously, that's every single person's choice to post something or talk about something or share about something, right? But the inconsistency is the issue. Where, let's say you're saying that the thing that you value is freedom, but you will only talk about freedom when it relates to certain issues, but you won't talk about freedom when it relates to other issues. And asking ourselves why we have that inconsistency, why do we only care when it's about this, but we don't care when it's about something else? Is it a matter of not caring? Is it a matter of not recognizing that those two things are relating? Is it a matter of intentionality, right? Did you intentionally think, oh, well, I have something to say about this, but I ain't talking about that? This kind of post kind of hits me talking about the same subject, because basically, do I choose to stay silent on all issues, or do I speak up on all issues? Do I specifically decide to talk about certain valued issues, so choosing things based on a certain value, or do I decide to kind of go with how I'm feeling in the moment? Because a lot of the messages that I've received have been that I shouldn't speak up about certain things, or that I shouldn't talk about certain things, right? And that's really hard to decide to do or not to do. One, on the emotional end of you want to share certain things, or you want to interact with people about certain things, or something just piss you off and you want to say something. But both on the other end of hey, this is happening. There is something meaningful happening. Why shouldn't I speak up about it? Why shouldn't I, with my little bit of followers, not speak up and say something? And so, I mean, I've had to make decisions about what do I share on my public pages? What do I share on my personal pages? What will resonate with people and what won't. And over the last few years, I guess I've kind of taken on, I will speak about these things. These are the things I care about. These are the things that I want to talk about. These are the things that I focus on, regardless of anybody's opinion. Because those are the things that I value and I want to continue working with. And then there's other things that I'm able to kind of say, okay, I'm not the person that should speak up about this. I don't have enough information, I don't have enough knowledge, and I don't have the energy, regardless of whether or not I have the emotion. Because the emotion's there, right? We all have opinions. Like, we all have ideas and we all have ways of viewing certain issues. That doesn't mean that we are educated on those issues. It doesn't mean that we are the best person to have a conversation about those issues. It doesn't mean that we have authority on those issues. And having authority in one area of your life does not mean that you have authority in other areas of your life. So, I can feel very confident talking about certain issues because I have that authority. I know for a fact that I've done the work. I understand it. I understand the people. I understand the complexities, and I have a voice to say and use for that issue. Other things I don't necessarily do, whether or not I have an opinion or not, it doesn't really matter, because part of something that we need to understand is that we have some form of authority in our lives, whether you think it or not. You could be the lowest person on the totem pole. Somebody's looking to you to see what you say and what you mean and how you use your words. And that means that we all have that responsibility of authority, whether or not we want to take on that role or not. And we all have the ability to abuse that power and contribute to the learned helplessness of others, right? And to contribute to being another example of why change can't happen or why things can't get better. That's not to take away from the personal responsibility of each individual to work on their own issues and to work through their own issues and to get out of those situations, right? But that's not how that happens. When somebody has been, there's personal responsibility, but personal responsibility only goes so far if you have the ability to take on your responsibility. If you are being controlled, manipulated, abused, if you have been in those situations and so you genuinely believe that there's just no hope, somebody else has to enter the situation. Somebody else has to be an advocate, and somebody has to help the person learn that they can be helped. Notice that the term isn't learned responsibility-ness. It's not, hey, this person just doesn't buck up. This person just doesn't pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. This isn't an issue of a person choosing not to care about themselves. This is an issue of them not ever having received the help in order to understand that help is a thing that happens. We are human beings. We live in a world where we interact with other human beings. Literally, if you were left on the street corner as a baby, you would die. We are human beings. One of the things that sets us apart from other animals is the fact that we require help. We require other human beings to help us to get through to the next stage of our life. And many, many people have been through stages in their lives where they have been decimated, where they have been shown that there is no such thing as help. And every single time they thought that there was help, it didn't come. It didn't come, and it won't. And that is genuinely the thought there. And guess how you fix that? By helping, by being there for them, by speaking up, by doing something, by being somebody who allows for them to receive the help and to actually see that there's a new pattern that can be formed. And that requires us using whatever authority we have in our lives for the good, to help those people. And that authority can come in the form of being a mother or a father or a friend, a sister, a brother, being a leader, being somebody who posts on Facebook, being somebody who goes and volunteers, being somebody who goes and marches with others. You don't really know the extent of the authority that you have over somebody else's life unless you understand that there's people who have basically everybody is their authority. People who have never had positive authority. So anybody who comes in with the helping hand is going to be a positive example of authority, and they'll be able to be guided in a positive way. And we have the power to take on that role. I can feel my anxiety going up just like talking about this, because I think about the possible consequences of sharing something where I basically am telling you guys like, hey, you know, don't listen to authority, because that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say that you should never submit to authority. I'm saying that we need to be skeptical of authority, and that we need to consciously and proactively question authority and like genuinely seek to have positive authority in our life, both from our receiving and delivering end, you know? And it scares me to think, oh, well, somebody will listen to just part of it, or they'll take certain parts of it out of context to use for a negative way, or to use against me, because that's really the fear that's in my mind. My fear is, you know, who's going to listen to this? Like, who in my life is going to listen to this, and how will they react to me saying this? It's very hard to take a step forward and to try and change the patterns in your life where you are saying, I am no longer going to be okay with so-and-so telling me what I should and shouldn't do, and so-and-so telling me what isn't right. And it's very hard to do that when you also don't feel like you have taken any steps toward being your own person and understanding things in your own right. Because let me be very clear, there are plenty of us, myself included, everyone included, that have said the wrong thing, that have thought we were right, we thought we were doing the right thing, or we thought we knew better, we thought we were so freaking smart, and we spoke on subjects we shouldn't have spoken on, or we said things that we shouldn't have said, or we asserted our authority in ways that we shouldn't have. I think everyone does that. You know, if you're a little kid and you take someone's toy and you're like, it's mine, and my mommy said this, like from that moment on till now, till we're old people, that's always going to be a possibility. And so obviously part of the assumption of authority is the assumption of taking on responsibility, which means that you are still responsible for what you do and don't do, and there are still consequences for what you do or don't do. We watched that documentary on Centoya Brown, and I mean, it's kind of a heavy documentary, and I watched it more because I wanted to just kind of understand the context of the conversation around her, because I've seen a lot of people use her as an example. She's what you would say yet another example in a lot of the conversations that we've been having over this week about race and inequality and a broken criminal justice system. But I mean, if you take a step back, there's definitely the argument of saying, I mean, she did murder someone, right? And so there's the people who feel very justified on the fact that she murdered someone. There needs to be consequences for that action. And that makes sense. She says it herself. She did a bad thing. But without taking into consideration the fact that this was a person who had an entire life, an entire lifetime of being stuck under negative authority, who then, when they finally took actions that were for the purpose of moving forward, they were wrong actions. Because what happens when you don't have positive authority and you don't have people who have taught you who you should and shouldn't submit to, and what is and isn't right, and what you should and shouldn't value, and how you should and shouldn't act, you're probably going to do dumb things. You're probably going to do things that are bad. And for many, many people in this world, that first action where they sought to seek support, where they sought to gain autonomy, ends up being an action that destroys their life. And it's very easy to be on the outside of that and to judge it. It's not so easy to put yourself in those shoes and try to feel it and try to understand it and try to be in it. Every day we choose how we engage with the world. Every day we decide like who we're going to talk to, what we're going to share, who we're going to engage with, what we will engage with about, what we will be silent about. And every single one of those things has power. Whether or not we ever see consequences for that power, whether or not we even recognize the fact that what we said affected a person in a certain way, that affected their life in a certain way, whether we contributed to them having positive or negative examples of authority in their life, whether we helped or led them to feel that there will never be help. There is a consequence, whether we felt it or not. And those of us who've experienced what it feels like to not have any support, to not have help, or to know what that silence means. Those of us who have experienced silence and inaction as yet another form of negative authority in our lives. We understand that what you don't speak about says just as much as what you do speak about. What you make fun of makes a huge difference in what you say you believe and then contradict makes a huge difference to the people in your lives and the people that are seeing you as an authority. So I don't know how to recap this. I guess it's not an easy subject for a lot of people to think like, hey, who's the person I go to? Who do I get help from? Who's there to help me? And then on the other end to be, who do I help? How do I support people? Who do I speak up for? Who do I give power to? Who do I uphold and who do I give space to? These are things that we kind of gotta constantly be working through, like it's just a part of our life. It's a part of our society. It's a part of the freedom that we enjoy in this country. It's part of the freedom and autonomy and choice that God gives us. And personally, I think it's important to call to Him and to ask Him, like, God, please just, what do I do? What is right? How do I find out what's right? Like, who do I ask? Should I take in this person's statement? Should I believe what this person said? Should I apologize for this? Should I not? Should I stand by this? Should I not? Will this help somebody? Will this hurt somebody? Help me. I watched a person on Facebook today, and they said the message that they got from God recently was just the word repent. Just for us to that's it. That she didn't have more to say about the actuality of what's going on in the world. And she had the platform to say it. She had the credibility to say what she wanted to say and to probably turn a lot of people in her favor and on either end of the spectrum. Instead, she just said that it was just about turning to God and having Him be the one that shows us our way. And that's kind of what I was thinking in my head of, like, I was like, do I say this? Do I say that? And I'm like here trying to make a decision, like, how do I say what I want to say? How do I move forward with what I want to say? Should I move forward with what I want to say? At the end of the day, each of us has to decide, who we're going to give authority to in our lives, who will we submit to, who will we exercise authority over in our lives. And it's not a very easy question. It's not a very easy subject. I'd like to hear what you guys think and your experiences, both on the positive and negative side, and how you make these decisions. And if you pray to God, what you feel He's leading you to. I think that's it. I don't know what else to say. Thank you so much for listening to this. If you listened to it all the way, I really appreciate it. Hopefully you didn't stop in the middle and you've heard something you didn't like. But thank you. And I will continue to share podcasts on here when I have things that come up like this, or when I'm just thinking about a certain subject. The way that I wanted to connect this to like future podcasts was that a lot of what I say, I have to take into consideration, should I say that? Should I share that? Or do I have to share that? It's part of what I need to say. And so hopefully you don't judge me too harshly. And hopefully you can take into consideration that I don't take it lightly to talk about certain subjects, even if I make a joke about it, or if I just kind of say something fleeting, or I kind of make an assumption about something. But I'm always open to hearing feedback, and I will spend years thinking about that feedback, so feel free to give it. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week. Please stay safe and healthy and be blessed. Peace out.